Ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, let's welcome our distinguished guest speaker, Professor Nasr.
Usually we Persians begin, all Muslims begin things in the name of God, and that's what I was just invoking. I've been asked to give a lecture tonight on friendship between civilizations, invited by my dear friend, Dr. Mahallati. And although not well, I've been ill for the last few weeks, and with many requests. His requests always came first. I've known his family long before he was born, and my father and grandfather knew their parents and ancestors. Comes from a very distinguished family in Shiraz, and I think Oberlin should be very happy to have him here. And this is such a wonderful college. As I was saying yesterday in class, the last time I visited this campus was when I was an MIT undergraduate, and we beat you in squash on a wintry day. But thank God the college continues as one of the best liberal arts colleges in this country. The initiative began to have this Friendship Day, and at the same time to pay attention to the importance of friendship between civilizations is, of course, of the greatest significance. But let us ask the question, first of all, why is it that friendship between civilizations is of significance? Why has it become important? In order to understand that, we have to scratch the pages of history a little bit and go back. The fact that we now talk about civilizations is itself a very important development in the relation between civilizations. Traditionally, for millennia, there were different civilizations in the world. Some had contacts with each other, some did not. But they were aware, usually, even the isolated Japanese or Chinese civilizations, of the presence of other civilizations. And although usually everybody considered itself to be superior, they did not obliterate completely the acceptance of the existence of other civilizations. The medieval West hated Islam. Many books were written against the Prophet of Islam, but had the greatest respect for Islamic civilization. Those crusaders who were massacring Jews and Muslims in Jerusalem, they wrote back home that remarkable civilization that they were living in and fighting in. The idea that there's only one civilization is a modern invention. And it came actually gradually at the end of the Renaissance and the 17th century into the European mind, in which not only was world history seen as a Eurocentric history, which is natural, the Chinese also saw the world in a Sinocentric way, but that in fact other civilizations were irrelevant in the march of history, and they were no more than contributions to the civilization which was modern Western civilization. And so gradually the term civilizations in the plural ceased to be used, especially in the political domain and cultural domain. And as the colonial period spread and Western Europe began to dominate over the rest of the world, to be civilized meant to be Western, to be European. And the other civilizations of the world developed a very strong inferiority complex because of the military domination of this one particular civilization over them, and tried to become civilized. What I'm wearing right now is one of the last marks of it. From dress to food to even the transformation of language, there was a current for some time to try to become Western-like. Even in my own mother tongue, Persian, or in Arabic, when you say someone is mutamadden, the word tamaddun in Persian comes from the Arabic word for madan, mudun, meaning city, like kivitas, from which comes civilization. The word mutamadden in Persian, that means someone who knew how to use the fork in eating peas, and how to use the second glass for this and that, and that's what mutamadden meant. Had nothing to do with ethics, and nothing to do with Persian culture. Absolutely. Just until a few decades ago, and it still is like that to a large extent. It still is, despite all the revolutionary change that has taken place in Iran, and the same is true for Egypt, or for Japan, which was Buddhist and Shinto, or for India, which was primarily Hindu. Doesn't make any difference. For a long, long time, the idea that there was only one civilization dominated over much of the world and philosophized into a philosophy of history by Hegel in its idealistic sense, and by Karl Marx in the materialistic sense. And communism itself is based on this idea of the denial of the multiplicity of civilizations, as was this liberal so-called idea that came out of the idealism of Hegel. Then gradually Western civilization began to face very deep schisms within itself and very deep problems. While the French and the Spanish and the English were vying for colonial influence in Africa and Asia, these schisms did not really come about so much. Gradually, when in the late 19th century, these European powers began to fight against each other in a new and very powerful and destructive manner, from the Franco-German wars all the way up, of course, to the First World War, which was really the death knell of the idea of one single civilization among the high-level intellectuals of the West who really understood what was going on. Today, still, some American politician comes on the television to get some votes, talks that we are civilized, those people in Yemen are not civilized, and so forth. This is the remnant of this way of thinking. But for the intelligentsia, the philosophers, the thinkers, the poets, the greatest poets of the English language, Ezra Pound, T.S. Eliot, they began to understand that something is wrong, and there's not only one single civilization, there are other ways of looking at the world, and gradually also those civilizations which had been subdued began to raise their head. This is one of the major events of the 20th century to which we pay very little attention, including the revival of the Islamic world, revival of the Hindu world, and a revival now of China under the veneer of a Western pseudo-religion called Marxism, but in reality it is really Confucian China that is coming back to life again as an independent civilization. It would not like itself to be considered as part of the civilized world in the sense that Diderot or some French philosopher of the age of the Enlightenment. And so we're back, fortunately, to the idea that there are civilizations in the world. In this context, another unfortunate thesis was presented about 3 decades ago by a professor from Harvard University, Samuel Huntington, called The Clash of Civilizations, which was not only a scholarly work, it was really a position paper for action. And many people, especially when those were called the neocons in the American political setup, took this on. The idea that there were these other civilizations that are challenging the West, and the greatest danger to the West is the alliance between the Islamic world and China, and the idea of the West and the rest, and that the civilizations are always in clash and in enmity and so forth and so on, which has had, of course, devastating effect upon international relations in the past few decades. America itself has suffered through 2.5 wars. I said 2.5 because we don't know what's going to happen in Libya, but in Iraq and Afghanistan, and also indirectly in Yemen, other places. And it's always with the Islamic world for the moment. And no matter what the Chinese do, nobody's going to send soldiers to Xinjiang. That does not happen. But in the Islamic world anyway. But from the other side, of course, much more the suffering that the Islamic world has undergone, including the death of 1 million Iraqis, either death or maiming or physical harm done to over 1 million Iraqis, and the uprooting of 4 million of them, and the destruction of one of the major cultural centers of Islamic civilization. by looting, by murder, and you just cannot imagine what happened when nobody even talks about. So many unfortunate things have resulted from that, and the response to that, people now begin to speak about friendship between civilizations. I mentioned this philosophical prelude in order to situate us where we are, why this very idea is at the present moment in human history so important. Of course, friendship is not possible unless there are two people at least to be friends. So to talk of friendship means already the acceptance that there's more than one civilization. But that's something extremely difficult to accept outwardly by many Western people trained in thinking that what they do, how they see the world, is the only correct way. And the other people will sooner or later catch up. I mean, we see this concretely in, let's say, the fashion of women in Paris. What Pierre Cardin or somebody else designs in Paris, everybody else is supposed to emulate. But that is not how the world works. And more, the multiplicity of voices in the world is going to be persistent. The non-Western cultures and religions were considered to die out by many writers in the West in the early 20th century. It didn't die out. And the latter part of the 20th century, in fact, was witness not to the dying out, but to the reassertion, oftentimes aggressive, oftentimes militaristic, of methods of living and seeing things and cultures and religions which were supposed to simply be absorbed by the process of what was called modernism. Those days are finished. Modernism is finished. That's why many people talk about postmodernism now, but not the other civilization and cultures do not even accept the postmodern idea of the relativity of modernism, because that assumes a kind of nihilism, a lack of any values of absolute character, which in fact is not what the other civilizations accept. Now let me come back to the question in a more concrete way of friendship between civilizations, and very briefly ask, what civilizations? What civilization? The way Huntington counts it, of course, he separates North America from South America and unites North America and Western Europe as one civilization. And then the Orthodox world, which is that of Eastern Christianity, that is Russia, Bulgaria, Greece, Romania, other places like that, Serbia, as another civilization. And then the Islamic civilization, India, and then he separates the Chinese and Japanese, and so forth. I will not go into that. And that division is not very unintelligible. It's a fairly good division. Of course, one could argue that South America is part of Western civilization, although it has more Mesoamerican elements in it than North America does, either ethnically or culturally or even religiously. Look at the religion in Brazil, even Christianity in Brazil, how different it is from Christianity in Oberlin, Ohio. One of the major differences comes from still the presence of the Mesoamerican religious traditions in Brazil, which have died out completely in Ohio. I don't see any effect of American Indian religion here. It's no longer present. So there's some argument to that, but I shall not get into that. The reality of the fact is that there are multiplicity of civilizations, and although Western civilization still is very dominant, not only within Africa and Asia, but even, let's say, North America vis-a-vis South America. Colombia belongs to South America, Ohio belongs to North America. But there's no relationship of equality, of parity in power. So the power of various civilizations is not equal, especially military power. But nevertheless, the other civilizations are there. They cannot be ignored. And the interrelationship between economic and political and social relationships have become such that it is impossible to really isolate one civilization as if the others didn't exist. And the very processes of modern technology, communication and so forth make that impossible. So we come now to the question of friendship. If we accept the fact that there are different civilizations, how can one have friendship? Friendship, of course, has many levels. This afternoon there was a conference about this. I spoke a few minutes about this. And I don't want to discuss the metaphysical and spiritual significance of friendship. That was not what was assigned to me. I'm supposed to speak about friendship between civilizations. But friendship, at least even between civilizations or societies or nations, implies, first of all, the acceptance of the other. The acceptance of the other, which means the acceptance of certain rights, certain prerogatives, certain choices that the other must have, like I have. If there is only I, there is no friendship. It's like talking to oneself. There must be the other first in order for there to be friendship. So friendship implies a duality or multiplicity of subjects which are friendly. Secondly, it means a certain amount of respect for the other as the other, and not only for self-interest. If one becomes friendly with someone just for the sake of self-interest, that is not really friendship. That's the pseudo-friendship that we encounter, all of us, throughout life, in which people come and go, they call themselves our friends, the first moment of need they disappear, they lie to us, the hypocrisy that characterizes much of human relationships, and I could go on and on. Real friendship, as I said this afternoon, is very hard to find. It's a gift from God. But as far as civilizations are concerned, means that a civilization would accept the other civilization for itself, not only for its self-interest. Until now in human history, whether it was nations or civilizations, attachment or friendship with other civilizations was based on the interests of the party involved. And that's understandable. France was interested in its own interests and became friendly with Austria for a while. When those interests came to an end, that would be broken and would become friends with Germany against Austria in the 19th century. All kinds of things that occur in the history of every continent in the world. But today, as a matter of fact, we're in need of a friendship which is not simply that of self-interest. Otherwise, let's not waste our time to talk about friendship between civilizations. We need something deeper than that. And that is precisely why we need something deeper than consider civilizations simply as political structures. We must consider them as cultural, spiritual, artistic, literary, human structures, and not political. So it's not just, all right, you say the West, here are these governments, the East, these are these governments, we meet in the United Nations. The United Nations doesn't define all the reality of the nations of the world, it's the representation of the governments. We need to spread this friendship of civilizations to see the civilization in a larger context, more than simply the political. Otherwise, friendship does not have any meaning except expediency, and it passes like the wind. Now, when we look upon civilizations, we found that every civilization was founded by a religion, or by what the great English scholar of Tibetan Buddhism, Marco Pallis, called the presiding idea. Over every civilization there presides an idea about the nature of reality. That idea has always considered to be of divine origin. Even if you do not want to use the word religion, which is an Abrahamic term in many ways, and you don't have a word, even word for it, the Navajo, let's say, or Hopi religions of North America, they don't have a word for religion. But they have a worldview, that every civilization has been created by worldview of a sacred and divine origin for those who live within that worldview. I think this statement, the way I explain it in this way, is impossible to refute historically. Look at Greek civilization, Egyptian civilization, Hindu civilization, European civilization, which begins with Christianity. And when Christianity comes to Europe, we have a new civilization. It's not the Roman civilization. It incorporates many things of the Roman civilization. But this Christian civilization, all the way up to today, in which some people even repudiate Christianity, and Islamic civilization, Zoroastrian civilization in pre-Islamic Iran, and you can go on all the way to small civilizations of faraway places, let's say the Aborigines of Australia. That is civilization. Much of it was destroyed by the white man. Something of it survives, but what survives shows that it was based on religion in the universal sense of the term. So in a sense, the friendship between civilizations requires more than anything else friendship between religions that form those civilizations and the worldviews that will form those civilizations. Friendship between religions, in the universal sense of religion, is at the heart for the understanding of other civilizations and for friendship with other civilizations. Supposing I want to understand Japanese civilization, or I can start learning Japanese and read about Japanese history, about the Shogun period, the medieval period, when Kyoto became capital of Japan, and all of this. But to really understand the essence of Japanese civilization, I'll have to know something about Buddhism and Shintoism. If I don't understand anything about Zen, I will not understand anything about the spirit of all the beautiful gardens in Japan. No matter how much I study the geology of the rocks that are put on the ground and the gardening and so forth and so on, that's not I'm going to explain the real inner meaning of it. This is something that was shunned for a long, long time. And Western academia suffers a great deal from the fact that many of the disciplines still carry the baggage of the secularized 19th century view of the social sciences and of history. People study political science of the world, in which the religions of the world are hardly ever studied, and as if they're totally irrelevant. And then 9/10 of every event that takes place has a religious element. I don't say 10/10, but there are economic and other factors. That's why the disciplines like this that were created to study these structures, international relations, political science, and things like that, are totally incompetent at predicting a single event of importance that takes place. A single event. An event as important as the Iranian Revolution, which is one of the most important political events of the 20th century, was not predicted by one single political scientist in either the United States or Western Europe. A couple of historians of Shiism had written something about it, but they were historians, they were not political scientists. And look what has happened in the Arab world in the last 2-3 months. All these departments for which we spend millions of dollars, all these PhDs in Arab studies who know Arab politics and so forth, they're all good for Monday morning, what you Americans call Monday morning quarterbacking. But nobody can really help the game on Sunday afternoon. That's out. And if this were any other discipline, the word science would be taken out. I mean, if the astronomy department could not predict once where Jupiter was, it would be closed immediately. It would not be astronomy anymore. I mean, the word science in the English language has a particular meaning and has also to do with predictability, according to the philosophers of science. So we're stuck in a very difficult situation in which many of the departments which deal with disciplines, which would be very important for the understanding of other civilizations, have put themselves in a straitjacket by refusing to consider elements of a spiritual, religious, artistic nature which have extreme significance in the lives of civilizations, because they don't fit into the models that are taught these graduate students in even the best universities, University of Chicago, Harvard, the places that have the best departments of government. It's the same thing. It's the same thing everywhere. So it's a difficult task. It's a very, very difficult task when we talk about the friendship between religions, to even make people realize that you first have to bring about understanding, between civilizations, that you first have to bring about understanding between religions. And that, of course, is a field that has been studied a great deal. Comparative religion is an important subject. It has been studied much since really the end of the 18th century, but especially in the middle of the 19th century, the different schools developed. But in the West, even the study of religion was influenced by that historicism and finality of Eurocentral view of the world, which dominated over other fields. And from that developed the so-called scientific study of religion, the Religionswissenschaft, that came from Germany to the United States, and many, many other things that I will not burden you with. That is, it was very hard for Western scholars of religion to develop a methodology whereby they could remain good Christians or good Jews, but really understand Buddhism or Islam or some other religion without reducing it. This reductionism, which the 17th century introduced into the European mind, which is very prevalent in many, many different fields. And so that itself has been a difficult problem, how to understand the other religions. But thank God in that field, a lot has been done. A lot has been done that is very positive. We have the traditional school, which speaks of the perennial philosophy, that there is a divine truth that is innate to the central realities of every heavenly revealed form of religion, and the idea of tradition, the idea of the multiplicity of religious forms, but the essential unity of their inner meaning, of what Friedrich Schuon, who died just a little distance from here, the great expositor of the perennial philosophy in the 20th century, called the transcendent unity of religions. Fortunately, that literature exists. People are now come to know more and more about it, even in religion departments. But there has not been the integration of that with civilizational studies. There's no place, as far as I know, in America, where that way of looking at what is at the heart of each civilization is integrated with the study of that civilization vis-a-vis my own civilization or somebody else's civilization. If you just go native, you do not understand other civilization, and if you do not also penetrate into other civilization, you do not understand other civilization. This is the great problem that all civilizations face. Look at it from the other side. I'm a Persian. If I try to study Heidegger, famous German philosopher, by not penetrating into his thought, I will never understand him. But if I try to leave my own philosophical tradition and simply become a Heideggerian in order to understand Heidegger, I become a 10th-rate Heideggerian philosopher and thus have no use for civilizational understanding and dialogue. The Orient is filled with 10th-rate European philosophers. Japan has more neo-Kantians than Germany does. But they're no longer there as Japanese thinkers. They're there as second-rate Western thinkers. And so in the West also, a few people have sort of been totally absorbed into another culture without being able to present that to the West. They cannot do that either. You need actually people who can build bridges across civilizations, who understand the essence of their own civilization, and at the same time penetrate into the essence of other civilizations. And the heart of that is precisely that worldview, that presiding idea, that religious Weltanschauung, or Gottanschauung, you could even say, because it's not only Weltanschauung in German is worldview, Gottanschauung in German is God view, both the view of the divine and of the world, which have characterized the life of civilizations over the ages. We have a tremendous amount of material, millions and millions of articles and books, libraries, like my own favorite library, the Wagner Library of Harvard, where I lived for many years. Just didn't sleep there, but they kicked me out, but the rest of the day I was there. And the Library of Congress, other places, which have millions and millions of books dealing with these subjects. But the integration, that has not taken place very much, especially now that we need to consider civilizations. Now this brings me up to a very important issue, and that is that civilizations, their understanding is necessitated, of course, by the fact that we no longer live in an insular world. We have heard so much about the global village. There's no such thing, of course, as a global village. Even today, a village in Sumatra is very, very different from Upper New York State. This is a metaphor that is a bit overused. There's still a tremendous diversity in the world. But nevertheless, there's also a lot of communication. You communicate more and more about less and less, obviously. We are in contact all the time with each other about nothing. Young people don't even talk to each other anymore. They can't love because they tweet all the time. How do you love a girl if you tweet to her all the time? You cannot look into her eyes and say something. It's going to be a catastrophe for my grandchildren and many of your children, when even this ordinary human contact is diminished. But nevertheless, we are in a world in which there's a great deal of information around and a great deal of communication around. And this is both destructive and it can be constructive, depends how we make use of it. But whether we like it or not, the modern electronic means have provided a great deal of information at the tip of the fingers of everybody who knows how to work a computer, which doesn't include me. I hope I will just have enough time to die under the door without really having to get into this. I'm an MIT graduate in mathematics, but I just can't work with the computer. That's beyond my intelligence. Because I once began to write with these machines, and it just changed completely the very process of creativity of writing. And I said, I just can't do it. It's another way of looking at things. It's beyond me. But anyway, there it is. Everybody can get information about everything, but it's an information that skims very much at the surface. So all of the mass means of communication have not brought about greater peace, greater friendship between cultures, between societies, at all. At all. Not to talk about augmenting and accentuating the environmental crisis by revealing to us every hidden beautiful corner of the earth where nobody has gone, and so the next boat lands there and puts 4,000 pounds of plastic in that unknown island when the first tourist boat arrives, and all of the problems that come from the question of the environment, which results from our knowing a lot more about the world out there. In every domain, we cannot be proud of having increased communication because we do not communicate about what is really serious as much as we could and we should. I do not think that communication between Islam and Christianity, through all of the emails and books that I received, and telephones and telegraphs and radios and televisions, has increased any more than what existed in Spain in the 11th century. I participated for 50 years in dialogue, ecumenical dialogue with Christianity. I've presented the Islamic world twice to the Pope, personally, as the leader of the Islamic delegation to the Pope. Just the other one, just 2 years ago, I spoke before Pope Benedict XVI. I have been in the middle of this perhaps more than any other Muslim living in the world today. But I, as a humble historian, would claim that the communication is not anymore. Once in a while, one finds a cardinal to whom one can really speak. And the cardinal can find some Muslim to whom he can really speak. And they sit down and they really speak. And they used to do that in Toledo 1,000 years ago also. The others are just passing words around. So let's reformulate and rethink and re-understand this whole idea of mass communication and the world being interconnected and everybody's everywhere. Yes, but those things can also be very, very negative. They do not create friendship automatically. They do not create empathy automatically. If you put on a program on Madagascar on CNN, it doesn't necessarily make you love the people of Madagascar more. It depends on what kind of program you put on. These programs can also create hatred. Look at the Islamophobia that's come up in this country out of nowhere in 20, 30 years. Without Pat Robertson and others shouting on the internet, on the television all the time, it would not have been as strong. The simple means of communication certainly are not sufficient to create friendship. We need something else. We need love. We need understanding. And we need to have empathy as something that attracts us in the other. And at this period of history, the non-political elements of other civilizations play a very important role. The arts, either musical or poetic, literature, philosophies, architecture, the so-called minor arts, which in Islam are not minor at all, but very merger, from cloth weaving to making of carpets. There are many Frenchmen who hate the Islamic world and Islam, but have beautiful Persian carpets in their house and wouldn't give up for anything. Today, especially, these cultural aspects of other civilizations play a very, very important role. They're really a providential role. I will just give you one or two examples. I was talking to Dr. Mahalati about this. I go to France very often. In France, there's now a wave of very strong Islamophobia. There are about 5 to 8 million Muslims living in France, all living in ghettos, much worse than the black ghettos in America in the 19th century practically. Very, very difficult circumstances, and once in a while they blow up and they have nowhere to go. They're French people, but they have no means of being integrated in the French society. Very difficult situation. And there's a lot of hatred, a lot of hate literature being written in French. And I feel embarrassed sometimes because I lecture oftentimes in France. Not for everybody, of course, but for most people. Then there comes along a concert of classical Persian or Arabic music. I remember once a few years ago, Shahram Naziri, one of the greatest singers of Iran, was giving a concert of Sufi music at the Municipality Auditorium in Paris, which is the biggest auditorium outside of the Grand Opera. Very, very large auditorium, about 5,000 people. And it was packed, absolutely packed. I was able to get tickets through just connections with Persians. Because I know Shahram Nazari personally, I wanted to go. And I was astounded to see that of the population in the audience, about 1/10 were Persians and Arabs and other Muslims, 9/10 were Frenchmen and women. The sacred art cuts across even the barriers created by Le Pen and other political rightists who want to create discord and hatred as part of their program to get elected. A second example, in Morocco, for many years now, there is a festival of sacred music at the beautiful sacred city of Fas, in Arabic Fez, the old capital of medieval Morocco, one of the most beautiful cities in the world. And every year they invite people from different regions of the world to perform sacred music. And this includes Western music. Sometimes they play, a chorus comes and plays Palestrina or Bach. Not popular music, it's very, very sacred music. And much of it is Islamic. And much of it from Persia. The Persians have won several awards one year after another. Every year, thousands upon thousands of Europeans make a pilgrimage to Morocco just to attend those concerts. And you could repeat that for Germany, for England, for many, many other places. When the Mawlavi whirling dervishes perform in London, you couldn't get a ticket unless you were Prince Charles. It's always crowded. There's tremendous attraction. Whereas if you brought Gaddafi to talk in London, if you could get him out, that crazy fellow, only a few people would come. I mean, there are people politically interested, but they're very small in number. And there's the hatred, the opposition, all of that manifests itself on this political and military economic level. And it's precisely at this time that it is so important for the cultural and the spiritual elements of the various civilizations to, first of all, take a step forward, and secondly, to be concerned by those who are interested in other civilizations for something more than private gain or gaining some business somewhere in Shanghai or something like that. That's there, that's going to be there. I'm not speaking against it. But friendship cannot be based on that. Friendship cannot be based in having a new computer center in Bangalore. That does not bring about a better friendship between Western civilization and Hindu civilization. It is based on the love of something in the other. And these civilizations, all of them, are so rich from different points of view, from different angles. And many people in the West, as a result of the plight of materialism and modernism has swept over the West in the last few centuries, are thirsty for these. They're so much in need of this. In the same way that certain people in the East have great love for Western music. You have Seiji Ozawa, Japanese conductor of what I consider the #1 orchestra in the United States, the Boston Symphony. It could go the other way also. It's not a one-way street. The love for the spiritual aspect of Western civilization, of Goethe, of Dante, of many, many other great poets and figures like that among many people in the East. Mahatma Gandhi had a great love for many English mystical writers. mystical poetry. The English language is very rich in mystical poetry. I'm not saying it's a one-way street, but for whether it's from the other side or from the Western side, I just want to assert the primacy of the significance of basing friendship over the civilizations on these spiritual elements. And that means not relying only on official structures, on governments and government organizations or military elements or world banks and things like that. The World Bank is not going to make people more friendly. Unfortunately, after the catastrophic mistakes it made in Brazil, which has destroyed half the Amazon forest, now they've finally admitted it. One World Bank person smiling. Fortunately, he left the World Bank. Dr. Majd is a musician now. He became wise very quickly. These official organizations will not do. The time has come for people who mean well, who have the spiritual capacity of the gift given by God of having empathy toward others, who have enough in them to be able to give. You have to have enough in you to be able to give. For those people to carry out this very, very important act, which is the most important for all of humanity. I think even people who are very selfish, when they're by themselves alone, even they deny the environmental crisis, they deny that 1 million people getting killed in Iraq, all of these do not matter, it's I who am important. Even they realize that precisely because of the present context of modern technology contact, that all humanity is really in the same boat together. The radiation in Japan cannot be completely avoided in Seattle. If you have another catastrophe like Chernobyl in Japan, probably the price of milk will treble in Washington State and elsewhere. Half the people in Lapland died because of Chernobyl. Nobody mentions that. What happened killed half of that primordial ancient culture of northern Sweden. And the reindeer, poor Santa Claus had trouble finding another reindeer. Half the reindeer died because of what happened in Chernobyl. Chernobyl was in Ukraine, 1,000 miles away. We are interconnected, and even in this way, a mistake made someplace, a catastrophe one place, affects everybody. One crazy person can cause you to pay $10 a gallon for gas. It could bring out the whole economy of America just down like that. We must realize this interconnection, that we are really all in the same boat, in a storm which the world has never seen, in ferocity and in globality, a storm that encompasses the whole globe. And we must realize that either we will sink together or we will be able to navigate through this together. But the captains of this ship must be those who have an interest beyond self-interest in mind. They have the interest of humanity, and they have a sense of friendship with others, even if the other is other than ourselves. Thank you.